ever broken into my house and stole my drugs.
911 what?
A fun, unique podcast taking you behind the badge. Unbelievable stories exploring the day in the life of a first responder. 911 is made possible by Carlos Bail Bonding and Eric Buchanan and Associates, fighting for those that have been denied disability, life, long-term care, and health benefits nationwide. Now, here's your host, DeMarlon Dean.
Welcome to this episode of 911 What? Thank you so much for listening. Today we have a special guest, Nate Silvester with the Bellevue, Idaho Police Department. And we're so excited to have him. That name may sound a little familiar because he blew up on TikTok. Actually, he was already huge on TikTok, but blew up even more after he had a little parody skit about Lebron James dealing with the young lady who unfortunately was shot when she was trying to stab someone else. So we're going to talk to him, but he's much more than a TikTok cop. This guy has 13 years experience. He has a criminal justice degree. He has also been a field training officer. We call that an FTO. He's been a narcotics detective, SWAT. He's done it all. So when we come back, we're going to talk to Mr. Nate Silvester. So here on the show, we talk about some of the crazy situations that first responders find themselves in. But it's not just first responders that hear crazy stories that you just wouldn't believe. Talk to my friend at Eric Buchanan and Associates, and he was telling me about a disability claim that was denied. So check this out. There's a general contractor building businesses, buildings, homes, whatnot, that had a traumatic brain injury that prevented him from doing his job anymore. So what did he do? He filed his disability claim. He'd been paying his premiums all along, filed his claim, and the claim was denied for, guess what? Making sandwiches. That's right. Making sandwiches. His daughter opened up a sandwich shop. The contractor was familiar with some of the recipes because they were family recipes that she was making. And so he went in a couple of hours a day and helped her make sandwiches. He even had to write some of the recipes and the way the sandwiches were made on the wall just to help him remember. But the insurance company said, look, if you can make a sandwich, you can build a house. Claim denied. But step in Eric Buchanan and Associates, and his team went right to work defending this gentleman and getting him the disability benefits that he deserved. So if you're faced with a situation where you've been paying your disability claims, you have an unfortunate disability and it gets denied for some crazy reason, you need to give Eric a call and just have a chat with them, let them research your case and see if they can help you. That's Eric Buchanan and Associates. You can check them out online at buchanandisability.com. That's buchanandisability.com, or you can give them a call from anywhere in the United States. Doesn't have to be here in Chattanooga, but anywhere in the United States. 877-634-2506. 877-634-2506. Eric Buchanan and Associates. Give them a call today and get them fighting for your rights. Nate, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm doing great. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about your career and what's been going on with you. But let's just start with this whole TikTok thing. So you kind of had a little fun at the expense of LeBron James, but that also cost you a little bit. So tell me about that. Tell me how that's changed your life.
Well, there's been some good and bad, but the good has definitely outweighed the bad. So, as you mentioned, there was an incident in Columbus, Ohio, where a police officer there, Officer Reardon, was forced to shoot and kill Micaiah Bryant as she was in the process of stabbing another young lady. Very tragic situation, right? No officer wants to be involved in something like that, but he was there and he did what he had to do. LeBron James, of course, does what he does and, tweets out something completely ignorant and inappropriate and dangerous in this case, essentially greenlighting Officer Reardon, right? And, police officers are they're used to criticism. We can take criticism all day long, but when it crosses a line like that tweet did, when he posted a photo of Officer Reardon with the caption, "You're next," #accountability, that's a threat. And the entire law enforcement industry, as far as I know, wasn't appreciative of that. And, there was a lot of memes and videos and all sorts of things coming out mocking LeBron James. And I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and I did. And so my TikToks are usually sort of centered around comedy and humor. And, my whole mission or focus with my TikToks has been to humanize the badge. And so I always at least attempt to do do more humorous videos than anything else. Well, this one was no different. I did the video sort of mocking his logic, if you want to call it that. And it was a funny video. It was clever. I thought I did a pretty decent job on it. And I'd already had a pretty large following on TikTok. And I knew that it would do fairly well with my TikTok followers, but I had no idea that it was going to go viral the way that it did on a national stage with, Fox News, CNN, those outlets like that, picking up the story and showing my TikTok on their networks. Not just, numerous amounts of interview requests, from various, podcasters, radio stations, news outlets, local and national. So, and here we are.
Gosh. And now you've made it to the biggest podcast yet, 9-1 What? So now,
right. Yeah. Sort of the culmination of all of this.
And you didn't lose your job, but you did get suspended because of it, right?
I was, I police in a very liberal area here in Idaho, and the mayor and city council members are liberal. And, even though my intent with my video wasn't to make a political statement, it was essentially just to support my fellow law enforcement officers and point out a very serious flaw with LeBron James' logic, as he sort of, I guess, is a self-proclaimed expert in all things law enforcement. And yeah, it was sarcastic, but it was also funny, but I also wasn't, really trying to make a political statement to this left versus right political ideology. I was just, it was essentially me pointing out that, the things that LeBron James says about law enforcement are idiotic. And it's irresponsible for someone of his celebrity status to tweet things like that. Well, my mayor and my, city council, they didn't appreciate it because of course they looked at the political side of it. And yeah, law enforcement has become political now, in that, police officers are being demonized by the left. We're being construed as systemically racist, inherently corrupt, and every time we go to a call, we have itchy trigger fingers and we shoot first and ask questions later. So there is sort of that political nexus when you're referring to law enforcement now. And even though that wasn't necessarily my goal, they took it that way, and they took offense to it, and they wanted to fire me. Well, fortunately for me, I have a very loyal and common sense Marshal, and she went to bat for me. She said, "No, we're not firing him. That's ridiculous. This is, you guys are completely overreacting." And she wanted to just give me a verbal warning and say, "Hey, don't do any more TikToks in your uniform." But they weren't happy with that, and so eventually they agreed to suspend me without pay.
Good. So, Deputy Marshal, you actually schooled me a little bit before we started the podcast. I hadn't heard the term Marshal in local law enforcement. When I think of Marshal, I think of U.S. Marshal, but essentially a Marshal in your case is equivalent to a police officer. It's just called a Marshal.
Right. Yep, that's exactly
City
right.
Patrol, not like a sheriff in the county.
Right.
Yeah. So as a result of that, I think you said there's a buddy that started a GoFundMe with a $10,000 goal. And where is that sitting now?
Well, it's sitting just over $500,000. Yeah, just another one of
Take
these.
that, LeBron James.
Right. It's pocket change for somebody like LeBron, but still for me, that's a lot of money. That's more money than I've ever seen in my life. And it's been a very humbling experience to see everyone's support and generosity. When I told my buddy about the suspension, it upset him, and, he created the GoFundMe in order to kind of help me through the week and the wages that I would have lost out on.
Well, that could have been like, $300 for a police officer. You would have been good. I mean, you guys don't make any money.
No. And well, that was why it was just so shocking, for the both of us. He originally set the goal at $10,000, thinking, well, that's kind of a lot, but maybe we'll get a few $100 to help him through the week and help him pay a few bills. And when I first looked at the campaign, it was about $600, and I thought, wow, that's really generous of people, because $600 is still a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's really cool. That's really cool to see people come out and support me that way. And then I checked again about 3 hours later, and it was up to like $6,000. And I thought, what is happening? Like, where are all these people coming from that are donating to this? And I kept communicating back and forth with my buddy, like, are you seeing this? And on his end, he's getting emails through the GoFundMe website from people who are donating saying, we love Officer Silvester. We support him. We appreciate everything he said in that video. He was spot on. We all agree. And he said what we're all been thinking this whole time. So that video really struck a nerve with people, and they were finally like, yes, someone finally had the guts to stand up and say something that we've all wanted to say. And like the GoFundMe was just, I mean, it was collecting like $1,000 every hour. It was just insane.
That's crazy.
And like I said, now we're up over $500,000, and it's just been a really heartwarming experience for me to see that kind of support, not just for me, but for law enforcement in general.
That's crazy. That's awesome. And it actually speaks to what I really feel like is going on more so in America. If you watch the media, you would think that most of America, or at least half of America, hates police.
Right.
I don't believe that's the case.
No.
I believe most of America still supports police. A lot of people think that we should have some reform. I agree. A lot of people think that we should do more to get the bad officers out. I agree. But I think in general, most people know that you guys, your heart's in the right place. You're there to do a job. You're going to do the job to your best of your ability. Right. Sometimes people make mistakes. Unfortunately, a mistake in your field costs someone their life. And, you know, we are seeing more people held accountable when they do make mistakes. My fear is you're making people look like they make mistakes, or you're saying people made mistakes when they actually didn't, and they did exactly what they were trained to do. And if you don't have a strong department to stand up behind you, sometimes you can get just thrown to the wolves when maybe you shouldn't. And certainly, no matter what happens, you still have to live with all the backlash that the public sees. And that's one of the goals with this podcast, is for people to kind of get an insight as to what really is going on. Because I really feel people should listen, wait for the entire. You can trust when you first hear a news story, you're not hearing the whole story. And more than likely, when you hear, quote, the whole story, it's going to still be wrong. Yeah. So we'd all do good to just wait. Let's get all the facts out and make decisions based on the facts. And if someone did something wrong, they need to be held accountable. If they were right and it was justified, but it looked bad, that's part of it. And that's just part of, you know, being in this line of work. It doesn't always look good. So I'm glad that this is the outcome for you so far. I think you said there's probably still some discussion going on about what your long-term, role or result will be with the department, but sounds like you're going to be okay either way. And I bet there's lots of departments that will be glad to have you.
Well, that's true. I have received quite a few job offers. You know, when I was doing the Sean Hannity interview on Fox News, that was something, you know, to be on his show, because I'm a fan of his and I watch his show all the time. And he told me that the governor of South Dakota had offered me a job, extended me a job personally, and said, hey, you know, if it doesn't work out in Idaho, we'll take you over here. And the ironic thing is that I had a gentleman from South Dakota on my TikTok comment on one of my videos that he's saying that, you know, I was a piece of shit and that I'm a racist. And, you know, luckily I don't live in South Dakota, because I would have been fired and then I would have got my ass kicked. And I said, well, that's funny, because your governor just offered me a job. Wow. So that is crazy. It's, you know, it's the whole experience has been, I mean, it's going in a very good direction. So, you know, the mayor was quoted in our local paper saying that, you know, my future with the department is uncertain. So, you know, that I may still get fired. And if I do, then, you know, I'll be fine. I've got lots of other opportunities that have presented themselves, and I'm going to take advantage of those, whether I'm a police officer or not.
Great. So, are you still just back in your normal patrol or whatever your previous assignment was? Or are you on any kind of special duty right now?
Nope. Just back to regular patrol work.
Okay. So let's talk about that really quickly. What is some of the when I was in the academy, one of the first things that we learned was if the crooks were smart, we'd probably never catch them, but they're not smart. So let's talk about some of the dumbest criminals or craziest calls you've ever been on that come to the top of your mind.
Well, one of them that comes to mind is kind of fits two categories. The dumbest criminal, one of the dumbest criminals I ever encountered, but also one of the more exciting calls I've ever been involved in. I was a detective with the Twin Falls Police Department, and I think this was circa 2014. And it's holiday season, so there's always a lot of bank robberies around that time of year. And I was in the detective division. I was alone that day, and the secretary came to me and said, "Hey, we've got a bank robbery in progress." And so I grabbed my vest, I grabbed my radio, grabbed my keys to my car, and I'm putting my vest on as I'm walking out to my car and turn my radio on, and I can hear that our patrol guys are pursuing these two bank robbery suspects. And they've, unbeknownst to them, they have a GPS device in the bag of cash that they have, because the bank teller was savvy enough that she was able to slip that in there as they were, getting cash from her. So we knew where they were. They weren't getting away, and they were driving through people's fences and through their backyards, and over canals and things like that. And the pursuit ended up in sort of a busy part of town where this Lowe's, the hardware store Lowe's, sits on one of our main streets, and there's a gas station in that same parking lot. Well, the suspects had driven around this gas station, and for a couple of seconds, our patrol guys lost sight of them. Well, I was sort of in the back of the pack at that point, and I saw the suspects bail out of their car. And so I drove through the Lowe's parking lot, and one of the suspects had gone one direction and the other one was beginning to run towards the front entrance at Lowe's. And so I had my eye on him, because I knew that if he got into that store, either we were going to have a really hard time finding him in a crowded store like that in the middle of the day. Just all kinds of bad things can happen when you got a guy with a gun, and he's desperate to get away. So I drove straight for this guy, and he didn't realize I was a police officer until he was face to face with the grill of my car. And he looked through the window and deer in the headlights, because he could see the police emblem on my vest. And he ran around the side of the car, and I bailed out, and I'm chasing him and, yelling commands at him, "Police department, get on the ground." And he's sort of reaching in his pockets. And so I'm slowing up with, my hand on my gun, thinking this guy might pull a gun on me. But he keeps running, and he's trying to pull his pants up at the same time because they're falling down. And I eventually catch up to him, and I tackled him pretty hard there in the parking lot. And one of the cool things about that is that as I was cuffing this guy up, my chief came up, and so he and a captain had driven into the parking lot and saw me tackle this bank robber right there. And my chief came up to me, and he sort of bent down as I'm cuffing this guy up, and he's like, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen." And he'd been on the job for, years and years. But afterwards I'm talking to some of the administrators, and they're like, rarely does it happen that a police officer or detective actually gets to pursue a bank robber moments after they've robbed a bank and actually tackle them and arrest them. So I was kind of the hero at that point for a little while.
For a little while. Hey, that changes in an instant on the police department.
Oh yeah, it does. They forgot about it 5 minutes later.
Yeah, you go from hero to goat just like that.
Exactly.
Wow. What about, in my short career, I saw a couple of calls. Most calls you deal with, and you just go on and you just kind of desensitize to the situation. But I saw a couple that really made it hard for me to sleep. Did you have anything that just really, broke your heart that you had to handle or deal with that just made it tough for you to sleep?
Oh yeah. Again, going back to my detective career, I was on call. I had just gotten off shift, and I was actually I was at jiu-jitsu training, and just getting into the training, and I get a phone call. We had a trailer fire, and so I go out to this fire. The fire department had already been on scene and actually put the fire out, but there were two young boys that died in this fire. They were trapped inside this trailer. It was just a small, camper trailer, but the door was locked, and a space heater had caught a blanket on fire and just sent the whole trailer up in flames, and they couldn't get out. And I responded to investigate that. And, in talking to the mother of those children, she, to listen to her describe how she did everything she could to get her boys out of that trailer. I mean, literally, her fingers were broken and bloodied because she was trying to pull the windows out. She was literally trying to claw her way through the wall of that trailer to get to her boys, and she couldn't. And that was it was devastating to listen to. Because if you have anybody that has children knows that they can sort of imagine, being in that situation and not being able to protect your children. And so that was one that's still, it sticks with you. And then that one that's still stuck with me.
Yeah. And what people don't understand is you have to go to, go to work the next day like nothing happened almost, Uh, uh, and if you're a street cop, you got to go take the next call. I mean, with a detective, at least you have time to kind of process it, and you're doing an investigation, but that's day in, day out. I mean, obviously those things don't happen every day, but gosh, when it does, it's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful. You like cop shows?
I do like cop shows, at least the ones that are accurate, and they're getting a lot better. Hollywood's getting a lot better at portraying police officers in a more realistic way. Training Day is one of my all-time favorites. That movie came out, I think, in 2001, but Denzel Washington was incredible in that show. And, even though it's the premise of that is sort of the corrupt cop, the corrupt narcotics detective thing, but it was a great movie. End of Watch is another really good one. The point of view from that is sort of, you're seeing a lot of footage from what would be the officer's body camera. And just that was another at the very end of that show, very hard to watch, but kind of the reality of police work in a lot of those bigger urban areas.
Is that the End of Watch? I need to check that out. Is that a series or a movie or?
That's a movie. Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Pena star in that movie. And their two characters are partners. And the premise of that movie is sort of them and their interactions with each other, their relationship to one another, and then a lot of the types of calls that they respond to as a partnership. It's a great movie.
Wow. I will have to check that out. I usually let my wife control what we watch. So she's watching like The Rookie and 911 Fire. I don't know. Fire. I don't know. I just, yes, ma'am, whatever you want to watch, we'll watch it. Very cool. If you've done, I know you're a narcotics detective, and I think, what type of other detective were you?
So I was a general case detective, and during that time, I investigated a variety of types of cases that ranged from burglary all the way up to homicide. Okay,
so you kind of did it all.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be cool, because I know here at our department that you were siloed, and I don't think I could. I get bored too easily. If I had to do the same type of investigation over and over again, I think I would it wouldn't go very well. So you actually kind of had it all. You had to do everything from, sex crimes, burglaries, homicides, everything. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And, that was a good thing, I think. And, like you said, you'd stick with one type of case for too long, and, you can get kind of burned out and get bored, or, it can be pretty monotonous, especially when you're dealing with property crimes,
Sure.
Dealing with burglaries and thefts, that can get pretty mundane. But I did have to work a lot of sex crimes with child victims, and that definitely takes its toll.
I could not do that.
Yeah, I did those cases for quite a few years, and that you have to do some mental and emotional maintenance when you're investigating cases like that, which I did. I had a counselor that I talked to, and if I could give anybody any advice going into police work, it would be, don't pay any attention to the stigma surrounding therapy as a first responder. Go get that therapy sooner rather than later, because you're going to need it. I mean, if you're busy at all, if you work in a department where you're taking more than 10 calls for service per shift, you're going to see some shit, and it's going to weigh on you. And the only way to, in a healthy way, sort of deal with that, at least in my experience, is to talk to a professional about it. Because you can only tell your family members so much, you can only tell your wife so much, you can only tell your kids so much. But to really, having a professional talk you through those, that secondary trauma that you experience, is the best way to do it, in my opinion.
That's very good. Has it changed in police work in general? Is that more accepted now that, hey, this is just part of it, guys? You need to do this, or is there help more readily available, or do you think there's still a stigma around it within the force itself?
I would hope in these larger, I don't know for sure, but I know that in larger agencies like the LAPD, they have these psychologists who are actually on staff that, the officers can go and talk to. But in, mid-size and smaller agencies, they don't have that luxury. And sometimes that, that mental health resource isn't readily accessible, and it should be. You know, when I experienced that, it was sort of a humiliating process to go through. First of all, admitting that you needed that help, and then trying to find the right clinic, the right doctor, the right counselor was very uncomfortable, and it was, you know, a little bit embarrassing. And it shouldn't be that way, right? There should be those resources available that, you know, okay, if an officer is involved in a critical incident, let's have him talk to a professional. And he doesn't even have to say anything, but just to let him know that, okay, this resource is there. And as soon as you're ready, call this number, instead of having to jump through all these hoops with, you know, insurance and the employee assistance program. It's just, you know, that's why a lot of officers get turned off to that idea, is because the process is kind of painstaking in order to find the right clinic, the right therapist, and, you know, combine that with how humiliating that can be anyway. They just don't do it. And they suffer for it in the long run.
Gotcha. What about to decompress or to relieve stress? What are your techniques for that?
TikTok.
It helps me relieve stress, that's for sure, watching your TikToks.
Yeah, you know, there's that, you know, social media is a good one. I go to the gym 5 to 6 days a week. That's really good for me. I used to train jujitsu on a regular basis, you know, 2 or 3 times a week. I haven't done that lately, but some sort of physical activity where you can sweat and breathe heavy for a little while, because that helps definitely relieve that stress, and that stress is going to build up over the weeks and months. So something physical, and then I think something also relaxing, right? You have to be able to sort of shut the rest of the world out and relax, whether it's meditation or, you know, sitting on a beach, going on vacation. Some of the best training that I ever went to as a police officer was called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And it was put on by a guy named Dr. Kevin Gilmartin. He wrote this book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And then he would actually kind of do this tour where he would go to different agencies and he would train officers on the material in his book. And the premise of that training and of that book was, you have to have an identity outside of police work, because police work doesn't give you much back, right? You put your heart and soul into law enforcement, but you don't get much in return. Now, it can be an intrinsically fulfilling job at times, but most of the time it's just sucking the life out of you. And if you don't have hobbies or, you know, family and friends and relationships with those people that you're fostering on a consistent, regular basis, you're going to burn out, and, you know, you're going to have some sort of mental health crisis of your own. And you got to do some maintenance on yourself physically and mentally. And, you know, the way to do that, I think, is just to have a life outside of law enforcement. You know, whether you like to go fishing, hunting, whether you like to play basketball, go to the gym, but take a vacation at least once a year, you know, with your family or with your friends, and put your regular real world behind you for a little while, and, you know, focus on yourself and take care of yourself.
That's some good advice. It's also a good place for us to take a break. My guest today is Nate Silvester, TikTok cop. And we'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and we will hear some more. Now, look, oftentimes these stories that we talk about on the 911 What podcast end up in somebody going to jail. Unfortunate, but it happens. If you find yourself in that unfortunate position where you're taking a trip down to the jail, then call Carlos Bail Bonding. That's Carlos Bail Bonding, and he'll take care of you with the service that you deserve, would treat you with respect and dignity, and get you out as quickly as possible. The side of the road when you're talking to the police is not the time to fight your case. It's not the time to resist. Go ahead, take the trip, go to jail if you have to, but then you call Carlos Bail Bonding and let them get you out. You can find them online at bailbondsmanchattanooga.com. That's bailbondsmanchattanooga.com. You can do that now and just check them out and see what people are saying about them, why people are happy that they chose to use those guys when they were in that unfortunate situation where they found themselves in jail. But bailbondsmanchattanooga.com, or you can give Carlos Bail Bonds a call at 423-475-6383. That's 423-475, excuse me, 423-475-6383. Carlos Bail Bonds. You had mentioned earlier that you have a book coming out. Tell me about that and when that might be coming, and whatever details you can share at this time.
Yeah, well, in the wake of my TikTok virality and that sort of making the rounds through national news media, I was contacted by a publishing company, and they saw the TikTok. They started kind of checking into my background a little bit, and they reached out to me about doing a book. And doing a book had always sort of been in the back of my mind for the last several years because, with my experience as a police officer, I have seen and done a lot of things that, the average ordinary person wouldn't really know about. And, I thought about, should I write my memoirs? What kind of book should this be? And I never really pulled the trigger on it, but then I was contacted by D'Angelo Publications after they saw the TikTok, and they're like, we want to do a book. We want to help you do this book. And so I met with the president of the company, and we drew up a contract, and we immediately got started. And the title of it is Never Off Duty. So it's sort of essentially the premise of the book is the idea that the police officers, they experience all of this work-related stress and societal pressure, the very high standard that they're held to, that never really ends once they check out of service at the end of a shift. They take that home with them, and it has an effect on them, and it has an effect on their relationships and their mental health, their emotional well-being. And we come at that from a few different aspects, but it kind of, the book sort of focuses on how I got started and a lot of the personal experiences that I had, in my own career, and how that a lot of that really does apply to sort of law enforcement as a whole, based on the conversations I've had with several, many police officers. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of being a police officer in 2021, and what we're seeing in the media as far as the way police officers are portrayed. And so it's a really interesting book, and my goal is that it'll do kind of what my TikToks have been doing, is sort of shed that positive light again on law enforcement, and help people see that the need for stable police agencies in the United States and those individual communities is important in order for those communities to thrive, and in order for the United States to, as a whole, to be a safe place, to be a safe country to live in and raise a family in.
Absolutely. And speaking of safe place, when the danger, when it hits the fan and everybody's running away, you guys are running towards it. You see people when they're in their most vulnerable state, when things are the hairiest, the scariest. Tell me about a time that you thought, this just might be it. I don't know if I'm gonna make it out of this situation. Just a really scary time you were encountered.
I don't know that I've ever been in a situation where I didn't know if I was going to make it out. I was usually pretty good about retreating from those situations or de-escalating those types of situations before they got to that point. But I mean, and if I'm going to be honest and raw here, I mean, I was involved in a shooting back in 2009, serving a felony warrant on one of our local guys. He'd been in and out of jail. He was what we call a frequent flyer. We're very familiar with him, and he had a felony warrant. And I went with a couple of our narcotics. I was on patrol at the time, and went with a couple of our narcotics detectives to go arrest this guy. And he was holed up in one of the motels here in town, and we had to force our way into the room. We knew he was in there. We knew he was hiding. Forced our way into the room, and he eventually came out. And he had a gun, pointed it in my face, and not to get too graphic or go into too much detail, but we did have to shoot him. And that was it was very surreal at the time, but it was all, it was scary. Definitely got my heart rate and my adrenaline pumping. And it was unfortunate, it was tragic that had to happen, but it went down the way it did because of the choices that he made. And,
sure.
I did what I had to do to protect myself and protect the other officers that were there with me.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask if he survived?
He did not.
So, how did that affect you going forward?
Well, fortunately, the silver lining there was that I had other officers that were with me who made the same choice that I did, to shoot this guy. And that kind of helped me remain confident in my choice, because you do kind of second guess yourself. If you're involved in a situation or an incident like that, it's very uncomfortable what happens in the aftermath. You're investigated just like any other person involved in a homicide. And they take us to a hotel room. They sequester us. We're not allowed to talk to each other about the incident. And the Idaho State Police investigated that incident, and they come to the room and they take photos, and they take your gun, and they take your magazines. And I called my attorney, and my attorney came. Just almost sort of mirrors an investigation that I would have done, had I been investigating a homicide. Sure. So it's very, very uncomfortable to be on the other side of that. But I was confident that I made the right choice. And so as far as having any negative effects, the only thing that really bothered me about that was this guy had small children who I ended up sort of having an encounter with a couple years later.
Wow.
He had a wife and kids. And at the time I was training one of our newer officers, and we got called to a noise disturbance. This woman was, she had a party, she was playing loud music, and, not a huge deal, but we're out there dealing with this disturbance. And as I'm sort of standing there observing my trainee as he handles this call, I'm looking around in the kitchen, and I can see a picture of this guy with the woman that we're now talking to and his two kids. And, that did have an effect on me, because I thought, why did it have to go down that way? This guy made the choice that he did, and now he's left behind his wife and his kids. And I'm sure that that's going to affect them, at some point. And with the way that situation was portrayed by the local media and by his family, I'm sure that his two young kids are being taught that, police officers killed your dad, and so however they interpret that as they get older, it might be, they might have a very negative outlook on police officers for the rest of their lives because of that. So I hope that's not the case. I hope eventually they grow up and realize that it was, their father who made those poor choices that led to his death. But it all depends on what they're told by their family members as they're growing older.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you shared that with us, because I don't think people really think about that side. I feel like people think that it is a light, that you guys take it so lightly if you have to, number one, even fire your weapon. Heaven forbid having to take someone's life. That's a heavy burden.
Yeah.
That's something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. And you have to process that. And fortunately, you're healthy enough that you can understand that you did what you had to do to survive. And it was the right call. But even knowing that, even when you did it, knowing that, you have that uncomfortableness of now everybody's looking over your shoulder and probably saying you should have done this, you could have done this, and all of that.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, a lot of officers, they don't make it after doing such a situation. They end up retiring because it's such a heavy weight to have on your shoulders. So thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully our listeners will understand it's heavy duty. It's heavy duty when you have to do something like that.
And it takes a toll, not just on you, but on people that are close to you. I was married at the time, and I remember making that phone call to my wife, my then wife. Like, how do I even explain this? Because initially she didn't answer the phone. I had to leave her a voicemail. I'm like, hey, call me. Something just happened, and I need to talk to you. And eventually she came to the hotel room where I was sequestered, and I told her all about it. And after that, she wanted to ride with me on every single one of my shifts, because she wanted to know what type of calls I was responding to, and if it was going to be a call to what I'd responded to during the shooting. I don't know what she thought she was going to do, but she wanted to be there. And so she was a mess afterwards. So it affects the people that are close to you. They're not quite sure how to respond to it and how to react to it. But, if you love somebody who's in that line of work and they experience something like that, you want them to be okay. And, they worry about you, they're concerned about you, and they lose sleep at night, worrying about those types of things.
Right. We'll be a little facetious here, because this is one of the complaints you get all the time. So how many officers were on the scene in that situation?
There were 4 of us initially.
How do you decide who shoots first?
Everybody. Yeah. I mean, that's, we get that a lot. Like, how come so many shots were fired? And I've actually gotten that message or gotten those comments on TikTok because, people know now they've dug into my past and they know that I was involved in that incident. And we fired 20 rounds at this guy and he was hit 17 times. And people look at that and they go, well, why'd they have to shoot him so many times? Well, your point is that we don't sit there and go, okay, who's going to shoot him? He's pointing a gun at us. Which one of us is going to take on this burden? If each individual officer perceives a deadly threat, then each individual officer responds to that threat, and we're trained to respond the same way. So if you think about it, four officers firing their weapons, 20 rounds is pretty conservative, for someone who's pointing a gun at all 4 of us. So yeah, there's no huddle to decide, who's going to do that. It's just each officer responds the way they think they should.
So I hope this is a learning moment for those that ask just that question, because you can't take a number, you can't draw straws and do all these things to figure out who's going to shoot first. And I know in my training, the minimum was a 3-shot burst. You shoot until the threat, not to kill, but until the threat is no longer a threat. Mm-hmm. And also people don't realize that just because someone is shot once, they still can be a threat. If they're still standing up and the weapon is still in their hand, they can still be perceived as a threat because they still have the ability to squeeze and pull off a round and pull the trigger. Right. So even if at the very minimum, it's, a 3-shot burst, 2 center mass, 1 to, well, some people call it a kill shot, but you're shooting for the essentially the brainstem. You want to stop the activity. So that's at minimum. That's what you're trained to do. And again, the general public doesn't understand that it's you're not shooting to try to wound somebody. You can't shoot them in the leg. You can't shoot the gun out of their hand. You have to neutralize the threat. Right. And it's ugly, but that's how it has to happen. So unfortunately, Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm glad that you were, that you had the support that you needed to get through that and come out on their side and still, be a very good officer. Otherwise we wouldn't have this great LeBron James TikTok to talk about. I said before the break, is there anything that you do now that out of habit, because of your training and because of what you've seen that you didn't even think about or didn't do beforehand, just as a precaution now in your regular off-duty life?
I'm definitely much more hyper vigilant just of my surroundings in general. And that just comes with years on the job. You learn to kind of, look over your shoulder, your head's sort of on a swivel. You look in, especially at night, you're looking for the shadowy areas that someone, and this might sound completely paranoid, and maybe it is, but that's just what happens, when you're a police officer for so long. And, you're looking for the shadowy areas, where a threat might possibly be hiding. You're checking the perimeter of your house. You're checking underneath your car. When you go to your car, you're checking in the back seat. Things that I think a lot of people, would behoove them to do anyway, even if they're not in law enforcement, especially single women. Mm-hmm. Actually, I was visiting my girlfriend this last weekend, and and it does make me nervous. So we have a long distance relationship, and it kind of makes me nervous that she lives by herself the majority of the time. And I took her outside of her house. It was nighttime, and I wanted to sort of teach her a few things that that I've these little habits that I've sort of developed over the years, and showing her that, okay, when you pull into your driveway, I want you to check both sides of your house. I want you to check the shrubs in front of your house. I want you to check down on the little space between your driveway and your fence that someone might be laying there, check behind the tree, make sure you're looking around and checking behind your back every now and then as you're walking to your car, just, little things to kind of get into the habit so you're not caught off guard in case there is a threat. So that's something that I've developed over the years, and that I try to pass on to people that are close to me, because it's convenient to do that. I spend enough time with these people, my girlfriend, my daughter. I want them to be safe. That's the only reason I pass those things on.
Sure. Do you sleep? Do you sit with your back to the door in a restaurant?
I do. As much as I can. I understand that sometimes there's not always a table available that allows for that, but I do try to sit with my facing the door, facing the exits. I back into my parking spots as often as I can. You know what I'm talking about.
I don't back into my parking spots, but I do. Now I have not been on the force at all since 1997. And probably it's within the last year or so, I have relaxed enough to let my wife watch my back. I would not sit with my back to the door in her restaurant. She knew we'd go in. She'd always make sure that I had, I was facing the door. I can't, we go across the country. If we get tired of driving, it's nothing for her to stop and go to sleep wherever she is. There's no way I will go to sleep.
Oh, yeah.
Just but it's okay. It's like, no, it's not. So that's life of a cop, things that most people will never think about, but that's just, that's just kind of the truth of things. Yep. What would you like? We'll start wrapping this up, but what do you think is a big misconception about your job or about police officers in general, that if you could just tell the whole world, hey, this is how it really is, what would you want them to know?
I think even the majority of people who actually support law enforcement sort of view officers as these sort of these calloused, robotic, machine-like people who are hyper focused on the job that they have to do, whether that's arresting someone, whether that's writing a traffic citation. And there's no room for compassion or kindness or friendliness or anything like that. And that's a common misconception. But I understand why people might feel that way about police officers, because there are some police officers who make the job much more difficult for the rest of us. Don't get me wrong. They're, not saying that they're part of the bad apple bunch, but they can work on their communication skills a little bit better. Let's just put it that way. When I approach people on a traffic stop, I know that they're nervous, right? They're inside their vehicle. They're like, oh no, he just caught me speeding. Great. I'm going to get a ticket. My insurance premiums are going to go up. And so they're nervous and they're uncomfortable. And I try to, in that first 2 seconds of when I make contact with them, my greeting is something like, hey there, how's it going? Officer Silvester, Bellevue Marshal's office. And that right there, just that very light tone, that, that friendly approach sort of sets the stage for the rest of that interaction. And I think that's important for officers to be able to practice. You can be friendly and courteous and still do your job effectively. You don't have to be hard, have to be rude. You can be friendly and you can engage with people.
You don't have to be hard. And what did you say after that?
Oh, you don't have to be hard or rude or stern with people. You're not there to lecture people, right? You're there to enforce the law. You're not the judge. You're not handing down a sentence. You don't have to lecture people. You can give someone a citation and actually make them enjoy the process, if you're friendly enough and if you're compassionate enough. So I think that's something that's incumbent upon police officers to do a little bit better at. But if I'm talking to the general public, the message I would give them is that not all police officers are that way. I think a lot of them, and a lot of the ones that I've worked with, are very friendly. They're very gregarious. And as long as if you show them that respect, that you'll get it in return.
Very true. So what's the craziest thing someone's ever done to try to get out of a ticket, and did it work?
Well, Well, what is this, a G-rated show, or what are we?
No, you can go for it. There's not going to be any kids listening.
I mean, I've been offered, bribes in order to let people, out of tickets, and I've been propositioned for sex, by females, and no, it did not work. Just so you know, I did not take them up on that offer. That would have been very disastrous for my career. But I understand why people would try to do that. Not that it's right. I don't condone it by any means, but they still received a citation. They didn't receive any extra charges for bribery or anything like that. But they got a citation and were sent on their way. So no, it did not work. Just so we're clear.
I must not be handsome enough. No one ever bribed me with any sex or anything like that, flashing their boobs. None of that ever happened with me. The worst I get is they would just cry. And I'm like, it's not going to work. You're still going to get the ticket.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it had anything to do with me being good looking or not. I think they were just that desperate. They were just very desperate.
So if you had to do it all over again, would you do it?
I would. There are some things that I experienced in my law enforcement career that are still a little bit unsavory, but I learned a lot about people, and I learned a lot about myself and about, the things that I can cope with and endure, and, some things that you can see and still be mentally and emotionally okay for the rest of your life. My 12 years so far in law enforcement has helped shape me into the person that I am today. And I like who I am today. So I would do it all over again. Would I do a few things differently? Sure. But as far as, sending in my application to be a police officer and going through that process, I definitely would do it again.
Awesome. Well, Nate, thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, this has been a pleasure. Maybe when you get that book out there, you can come back on. We can talk about that and
absolutely
show folks how to get it and all of that. Let everybody know what's your TikTok handle on TikTok so folks can find you there if they want to connect with you.
So it's Nate's Wildin, NATESWILDN, and that's the same on Instagram. And then on Facebook, I'm Nate Silvester, and the link for the pre-order site for the book is in my bio on each one of those accounts. So if they want to pre-order the book, they can do it at any one of those accounts.
Excellent. I will. Yeah. That's good. I'll make a note of that. So this has been Nate Silvester with 911 What? So make sure you like it and share and tell all of your friends about it. And but thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks for listening to 911 What? We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have comments or suggestions, please email us at 911what.podcast@gmail.com. And thanks to Carlos Bail Bonding and Eric Buchanan and Associates for making this episode possible.